RWBY's system of government makes no goddamn sense. The idea behind it is basically a miniature Congress where people are elected and can vote on certain things. On paper, it sounds fine, but when you look into it, especially in the context of the world of Remnant, it makes very little sense. I don't know if all the councils have this issue, but Atlas's only has 4 seats. What if they need a tiebreaker? Will it just be constant filibustering until someone gives in? Apparently not, because James, who has 2 seats on the council, can pretty much do whatever he wants because of it. Despite the other council members being against James, having 1 vote each apparently can't deadlock him until they elect someone new to take the extra seat away. And why give someone 2 seats anyways? Especially since there are so few members to begin with. The fact that can even be done is a gaping hole in how things are run in this world. Having very little insight into the structure of this world's politics was perfectly fine in the earlier seasons because it wasn't the focus and didn't have much effect on the plot aside from the dust embargo and shutting of Atlas's borders. Until Volume 7, where a good portion was trying to take James' second seat away and to reduce his power, which I already explained how it doesn't make sense for him to have power over the council members outside of deadlocking them. Unless one of them agreed with him, which would be dumb given what we saw of them. An improvement is getting rid of the democratic system, since I don't think democracy in the world of Remnant would really be a good idea. In a world constantly at threat from monsters that are one mass panic attack away from having a kingdom sieged upon, having a group of people vote on a response sounds slow and inefficient. Unless each council member has absolute control over a certain aspect of the kingdom, like James with the military. However, that's never once stated, implied, or even hinted at. James seems to be the exception. If anything, a structure more resembling an empire would make far more sense, with a sort of king of the world at the very top, assigning regional governors to the 4 kingdoms to manage them on a micro level, while the king manages more global issues. Said governors would still be subject to laws and not have complete control over the kingdoms, but would still have quite a bit of control over their areas, roughly about 95%, let's say. This would actually make James's authoritarian rule, and I use that very generously, make more sense in the context of the story. Because if there's supposed to be a council of representatives elected by the people, then why give one man complete control over the only military on the planet? Speaking of military, why would only one nation have one? Wouldn't all the kingdoms have a military instead of relying on what are basically mercenaries? This is where the king of the world would come in, as instead of each nation having its own military, there's a global military, primarily controlled by the global level government. However, there would be certain factions stationed at each kingdom that would be controlled by the regional governors to an extent. But they would not have complete control, with laws in place to ensure that the military wouldn't be abused. Or, if we need to have some elected body, then having something like the Terran Federation from Starship Troopers would also make sense. Basically a global military state for swift responses to grim attacks. Also, before anyone says anything, the Terran Federation is not fascist. If you think it is, then you're being fooled by some coats and can't even do basic research on what fascism is. But I digress. Basically, my point is that I don't think putting our real-world political views in a world where they likely wouldn't fit makes much sense. However, I'm not saying you can't make the system of government presented in RWBY work. Execution is what matters after all. In more talented hands, I'm sure it could make a lot more sense. However, this is RWBY, and very little about the world makes sense these days, but that's an entirely different discussion. Anyways, this was just something that's been on my mind for a while, and I just didn't really have much energy or motivation to make a video on it in the past. What form of government do you think would make sense in RWBY? Let me know in the comments to get that sweet algorithm going, and I'll see you in the next video.